So what if all the economic craziness we're seeing right now, what if it isn't just another market downturn? What if it's actually the end of an entire economic era? Well, that is the huge warning coming from billionaire investor Ray Dalio. He's convinced we are watching the current world order literally break down, and it's all based on these predictable cycles that have happened over and over again throughout history. Okay, let's get into this. You know, when Ray Dalio says the monetary order is breaking down, he's not just talking about inflation or interest rates going up. Nope. He's talking about the entire system we've been living under since World War II, and he thinks it's cracking at the seams. He's actually on record saying we've now entered what he calls the last and final stage before a massive system-wide reset. So the big question is this just some wild speculation, or is there some kind of blueprint we can actually follow? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down Dalio's framework for how empires rise and fall. We're going to see exactly where he believes we are in that cycle, and figure out what this historical pattern could mean for every single one of us. Okay, so the whole heart of Dalio's argument, it all comes down to one really powerful idea. History repeats itself in a predictable cycle. He's actually mapped out this 6-stage blueprint that he says every major empire, every single one, has followed without fail. It all starts with a new world order, right? Usually after some huge conflict, and that kicks off a big growth phase, leading to peak prosperity. But then, it always happens. Imbalances start to creep in, debt grows way too fast, and the wealth gap gets wider and wider. That leads to stage 5, conflict and disorder. Now, Dalio warned we were already there back in 2022. He now thinks we've officially tipped over into the final, critical stage, the reset. That's the point where the old system just can't hold itself together anymore. But here's the thing. This kind of breakdown, it doesn't just happen overnight. Dalio argues that before you get to that full reset, tensions start to escalate through a whole series of different conflicts. Most of us don't even see them as part of the same pattern, but they build on each other in a really predictable way. In fact, Dalio's identified 5 very distinct types of wars that start to flare up as a world order begins to unravel. Think of these as the flashing red lights, the escalating steps that happen way before any actual military action is on the table. So first you get trade wars, tariffs, supply chain issues. Then it escalates to technology wars. I mean, look at the battle for AI and semiconductor dominance between the US and China right now. After that comes capital wars, where you see things like sanctions and asset freezes used as weapons, just like what happened with Russia's frozen reserves. That's followed by geopolitical wars, fighting over alliances and regional influence. And it's only after all of that has been ramping up for a while that the final, absolute last resort comes into play. A military war. Now, while all those conflicts are basically symptoms of the breakdown, Dalio points to one thing as the most dangerous driver of this whole cycle. It's the one thing that he says makes this reset almost inevitable. And yep, you guessed it, it's the debt crisis. I mean, just look at this number. The US national debt is nearly $39 trillion. It's a number so massive, it's kind of hard to even wrap your head around it. And get this, it's growing by about $8 billion every single day. And here is where it just gets completely unbelievable. The interest payments, just the interest on that debt, have now blown past $1 trillion a year. Let that sink in for a second. We are now spending more money servicing our debt than we spend on our entire national defense budget. That's insane. And to bring it down to a personal level, that breaks down to about $113,000 of debt for every man, woman, and child in the country. It's this massive burden that, according to Dalio, future generations are going to be stuck paying off, but with dollars that are worth a whole lot less. And this is the critical warning, right from Dalio himself. He says, crises like this, they develop slowly, almost invisibly, until they happen all at once. The historical playbook is always the same. When a country's debt becomes totally unsustainable, they don't default. No, they just print more and more money. And that, of course, devalues the currency, which then forces them to print even more. It's a vicious cycle. So if we accept this historical blueprint and we look at this staggering mountain of debt, the big question is, how does this cycle actually end? Well, Dalio lays out 3 potential scenarios for what could happen next. All right, so path 1 is the disorderly decline. This is the riskiest one. It's basically where we do nothing, keep kicking the can down the road, and internal political fighting just paralyzes everything. The result? A possible major currency devaluation and a market crash of 20 to 40%. Ouch. Path 2 is a managed decline. This would take some serious bipartisan cooperation to cut spending and negotiate with rival powers. Growth would slow down, but we'd get a lot more stability. And then you have path 3, renewal. This is the best case scenario, where some kind of national unity and a massive productivity boom actually extends the cycle. But it's also seen as the least likely to happen. Now, there is one more possibility, kind of a wild card, that Dalio didn't really focus on, but it's a fascinating idea: the AI reset. The theory here is that a massive AI-driven productivity boom could create so much new wealth that it turns everything into a positive-sum game. But, and this is a huge but, it only works if those massive gains are shared broadly across society and not just hoarded at the very top. Okay, so after looking at all these huge global cycles, let's get down to the most important question. What should you actually do with all this information? How can you possibly navigate this kind of potential shift? First, and this is important, remember that Dalio might be early on this. These huge historical cycles, they play out over decades, not months. Second, even though he's a big fan of assets the government can't print, like gold, going all in on one thing is probably a terrible idea for most people. Diversification is absolutely your friend. And third, you gotta see this as a warning, not some doomsday prophecy. This whole cycle can be changed if countries adapt, stay productive, and find ways to work together. And this really highlights the difference in strategy. You see, Dalio, as a billionaire, his advice is to sell government debt and buy hard assets. But for the rest of us, a balanced, diversified approach, across index funds, real estate, maybe a tiny bit of a crypto ETF, that is a much more resilient long-term plan. At the end of the day, whether Ray Dalio turns out to be 100% right, kind of right, or totally wrong, his core message is just undeniable. The world is changing, and it's changing fast. This isn't really a prediction of doom. It's more of a reminder that in times of great change, the people who refuse to adapt are the ones who get left behind. So the real question isn't whether a reset is coming, it's whether you're prepared for a world that simply doesn't stand still.